So the speakers are very efficient with time, and we have plenty of time for questions. Anybody want to ask a question? Yes? I cannot see with the light. Microphone?
I just wanted to ask a quick question regarding the last presentation. If Europe has a problem, and that was the major discussion this week at the IMF annual meetings, the European problem and the problem with the Eurozone and all that, how do you think that will affect Brazil? And second, if China is affected, how will these numbers change in the short term?
It's going to be interesting. Can everybody hear me? Is it, okay. It's going to be interesting to see what happens in Europe over next week. I think it's going to take one of two major directions. You're either going to see Germany try and bear hug it and make a fair amount of demands for that bear hug, or it's going to be a little bit more disorderly around the periphery. I think in general, what the markets are saying is that lower growth, diminished economic activity, and deflation are going to be more of the concerns over the near term. You know, I mean, everything's saying that, from the flattening of the yield curve to forward inflation look to a lot of, it was Rio Tinto and a couple other major producers said that people are pushing back deliveries on taking raw materials. So I think there's a risk on the pricing and on a deflation side. I do think, you know, you get lower commodity demand and lower commodity pricing, you probably do get a strength in rally in the dollar. But I think diminished economic activity is, you know, on the spectrum, it's most bad for commodity producers and it's least bad for diversified economies. You know, Brazil's somewhere in between. It'll be impacted. It all depends on, you know, what pieces are impacted first. But again, Brazil's finances and reserve position, and it's not nearly over the tips of its skis as much as other emerging markets, my opinion.
Just wanted to add some comments. I think that in the past, this is an important change that happened to Brazil, but in the past, whenever you had a crisis such as this, the question wasn't that if Brazil would grow or not. The question would be if Brazil would survive or not. And I think that this is not more on the table. So right now, I think that Brazil will be affected for sure. Commodity prices will eventually go down. Brazil will export less. Probably the economy, instead of growing like 3.8%, which the official estimate, will grow like 3%. So it's still a very healthy number. Brazil has all the tools also to avoid a major crisis in Brazil. Reserves, international reserves are very high. You also have some banking reserves at the very top. You have some taxes that the Brazilian government imposed to foreign investment in Brazil. So summing this up, you could see that whenever there is if there is a crisis, Brazil will continue to do well, will continue to attract capital, and if we manage well our economy, maybe not this next year wouldn't be as great as we would hope, but we will see Brazil, it's a 10-year growth story. It's not a story that would only be for like a year or two.
Other questions?
Before I shift every last penny of my $112 in savings to Brazil investments, I had to just ask this, and I asked this of our distinguished chair as well. If you were advising the government about potential cracks, some things to watch that might change the fundamentals, what worry would you have to share?
Well, I can answer a little bit. Well, the main concern now is was inflation. We are under the inflation targeting program, and so the central bank starts some measures to control growth, and the government itself start controlling, reducing what was planned to be more expenses. So, but we continue to have a program called PAC, which is to promote growth and mainly for the lower class as well, and the residential, but controlling the growth. So it's a planned decrease in the growth of Brazil. So inflation is a concern, and that would be one of the main problems. Another thing to watch that the central bank is very closely watching too is the amount of hot money that goes to Brazil. Exactly when you want to shift your money to Brazil, what guarantees that you're not going to shift your money back to the U.S.? So institute controls or some sort of ways that avoid having this volatile money coming in and out of Brazil and causing instability. So.
Just to add some other comments or a different way of looking at it, I think that inflation should always be the main problem of Brazil because we are in inflation panic in Brazil. And I think that this has to change. Somehow, we cannot become a major power economy if we still have like a 11.5 nominal interest rates while the world is running under a zero interest rate scenario. So Brazil has to change that. Of course, there is this supply and demand story in Brazil. A lot has to be done. But I think that this is not the scenario that we are facing right now. So it's a little, we can be less afraid of this happening. But for sure, as inflation is this, we as the German, we learned that inflation should be the worst problem that our economy could have. So we would always fight inflation, but maybe not with such a high interest rate in our country. We foresee that interest rates will go down eventually in Brazil, and this is not bad for the economy, and it's not bad for the country. And here you have a lot of Brazilian entrepreneurs in this room here. And people, of course, the financial markets, sometimes they think that okay, you have to be very strict on monetary policy. But for the entrepreneurs that are in this, who are in this room, they would love to see interest rates coming down. So I think that, I think that the main issue in Brazil would be this one here, but I think it's manageable.
I'd only add that iron ore prices are important. It creates a lot of income today, every ship that leaves the port. Oil prices are important for raising foreign investment dollars and to keep Petrobras and all the infrastructure construction going. If those prices were to decline precipitously, it would be a challenge to make up the direct investment and income in other ways. Not that it would be impossible. I don't think Brazil has the run on the bank hot money issues that China does or a lot of other countries, but it would be a challenge to make up those differences.
And two other topics that I think that we need to pay attention to is that in terms of education, Brazil is far behind all other economies. So the government plus the private sector has to invest a lot in education. So Brazil can really become a major economy. And the other important point is infrastructure. Brazil has many projects in infrastructure. They have to come out of the paper and start building airports, roads, ports, and everything that gives more competitiveness to our economy.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Rodolfo, I have a question for you. How many IPOs, you know that in Brazil we have a lot of companies we've been dealing that haven't been discovered. In the next 5 years, how many IPOs you think Brazil can have? And I know that you brought 90% of the company public in the past. How many IPOs you think you have in 5 years from now? How many companies to be discovered still? Because
Hello? It's a very good question. I think that, of course, 70% of all IPOs coming from Brazil were sold to international investors. And for sure, this is not the right time to do an IPO in any part of the world. But this is also, crisis is something that we Brazilians, we are quite familiar with. and we tend not to be too negative when the crisis arrives. So I think that if the crisis do not affect us as much as what we could have, there will be many IPOs coming in the future. It's amazing how Brazilian entrepreneurs are able to create new ventures, new companies, new ideas, and how they can sell this to people that are eager to buy assets or well-managed assets and assets in natural resources. And it's in 2005, 2006, when people asked me, oh, how many IPOs do you think that we are still left? And people were kind of remembering Grupo Votorantim and Globo Comunicações, which are big companies in Brazil, very big companies. But none of them went public. And a lot of other companies went to the market, sold their shares, are listed companies. And Brazil has only 450 companies listed on the Brazilian exchange, which is, for a country such as Brazil, it's still to fill. So it's, I think that for whoever is here in this room who wants to grow its company, should think of an IPO, should think that foreign investors will help them, and the banks involved would also give them the way of raising that amount of capital that they will need to fulfill their expansion plans.
Well, we can have one more question very quickly. Okay, no more questions. We're exactly on time, 4:15. So this is the end of our session. Please, a round of applause.